You're listening to the Changing Normal podcast, where we strive to outdo the old normal and reject the new normal. And now your hosts, Owen, Dan, and Ben.
Hello and welcome to the Changing Normal podcast, episode 23. It's October 13th. And tonight we are going to chat about, of course, what we did this week. And then we're going to delve into a tree crop book discussion that Dan has wanted to talk about for a while, and we've tried to convince him that nobody's interested, but no, no, this should be actually pretty good. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that because it is an unusual topic, I would say. Most people don't think about trees as crops. So should be interesting discussion. And of course, we're going to do some stories in the news this week. But yeah, first, what did we all do this week? Dan, what did you do this week?
The biggest thing I got done was, not quite finished, but I got started on a few garden beds out back. Pretty decent area. It's, 24 feet by 50 feet or something like that.
Nice.
So a decent sized area set aside for the first. Long term, it's the first one, not the only area. But,
well, you cleared some trees and stuff, didn't you? Because your backyard was quite shaded.
Yeah, so I've got an extra, 30 feet. So the shade was pushed back, so it won't get early morning sun, but it should be okay. So, yeah. At some point, I might cut down the neighbors' trees as well, and then I'll have all the red ones.
Well, at least you have an in with the neighbors there. You probably can make that happen.
Oh no, that's the different neighbors.
Oh, the other neighbors on the other side. Okay. So when you say you're working on preparing garden beds, what are you actually preparing specifically? What methods are you using?
Well, I wanted to do like the no-dig garden bed style. And I wasn't sure if I had as much depth of topsoil as I'd like. And since I had access to some at basically no cost to me, I was like, yeah, bring me a couple dump truck loads of that.
Nice.
Some that was sitting over at my parents' farm after topsoil was removed for a barn construction site. So that was sitting there next to the fence line and scrape through that. I'm not sure how fun it's going to be as far as potentially the grass that's going to want to grow from that. It has quack grass roots in it and stuff.
So did you put down cardboard?
No, because of the grass roots that are in this stuff, I decided I was just going to dump the topsoil onto what was there, and I'll put the cardboard on top of that.
Good idea.
I'm really hoping that's going to cap that quack grass from coming up through. So if not, I'll be battling it, which won't be fun, but I think it'll be enough, especially with it if a decent depth of compost goes on top. So
and don't be shy with the cardboard, like 2 or 3 layers if you have to, like, you don't want too much, obviously, because it can actually not rot and break down over the winter, but you can lay it on pretty thick.
Yeah,
not too much trouble.
If worst case scenario, maybe it's not ideal for growing the first year, just due to setting it up a little haphazardly. But in the long run, it'll work out, Anyway, that's my theory. Sticking to it.
Do you guys know how?
Oh, go ahead, Ben.
How similar quackgrass is to reed canary grass?
Pretty different, I think. Reed canary grass.
Reed canary grass goes tweet, 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 and quackgrass goes quack, quack, quack.
One swims in the water, and one flies in the trees.
That's right. Quackgrass sounds like this.
Reason I ask, my summer practicum of college, I worked in a national park, and the job description that I had was to work with invasive species. So Japanese knotweed was one, and reed canary grass was the other. And Japanese knotweed ended up getting tarped. So, we kind of tried to flatten it, and then a black tarp, hoping it would kill it. Which, fun fact, Japanese knotweed, the root mass can stay dormant for 10 years and then all of a sudden decide to shoot up later. So basically it just needs to be mitigated insofar as finding a method of utilizing it. But the reed canary grass, I'm not exactly sure what the term is for it, but the root tips would actually pierce through the black tarp that we were using to suppress the knotweed. So I'm not sure if that, imagine the cardboard is going to be a fair bit more durable in regards to whether or not it would stop that. But like, it was just one layer of black tarp. Like, it wasn't anything spectacular or anything.
Right.
And also, if you were, the cardboard smothers it for like a year, maybe that's long enough to kill it. I don't know, I guess I'm kind of throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah, typically it's not the only layer when you set it up like this. Like, when you're laying it out underneath additional material, so then it has to get out through the cardboard and whatever soil or compost goes on top of that as well.
And your mulch top.
Yeah, and you probably have a top layer of mulch as well. So basically, you're hoping to kill it before it can claw its way through all of that.
Yeah, I do remember us. We may have talked about it one of the practical gardening shows or episodes that we did. Because I definitely remember you guys. Aside from outside of this podcast and us talking about gardening and starting gardens and using cardboard and stuff, I'm pretty sure I recollect that we talked about it in one or two episodes here.
Yeah.
I used cardboard around a bunch of my perennials as well. It definitely is pretty short term. Okay. Like, if you're not like going crazy and killing out a large area, it's like the grass will get through that or over it or around it within 2 months.
Yeah, if you're just using it by itself, when we do it, we usually do 2 layers on most things, and we try to make sure we have decent overlap of stuff. But yeah, for sure, it's not foolproof, for sure. And I do find that depending on what you have on top for mulch, stuff will actually grow in that mulch on top. And I actually found that wood mulch was worse, like using like a ground, like a chipped wood or a bark mulch. Almost, it's almost as if there was enough fine material there that laid flat enough that seeds could start on the top and then just grow that way.
Weird.
Now,
whereas
straw often has, besides the grain seeds, it can often have weed seeds carried in there. So does that not get those germinating when you use the straw?
We found that would get some grain popping up, which, is no big deal. It pulls out pretty easy. And yeah, we never had any problem. And I don't know if it's because it's kind of light and fluffy in some ways. If stuff there wasn't enough material there, dirt-like material to kind of germinate in. Yeah.
Okay.
But we didn't have the same sorts of problems like we did with when we've used wood as our, like a bark mulch style top layer. We tried using that because I had a bunch of it. So we tried using that around our blueberries and things, and they grew up quite quickly. So, yeah.
Side note, the 2 grasses are quite different. Cooch versus, or quack or cooch versus reed canary.
Yeah, I only see reed canary grass growing around here in fairly wet areas.
That's correct.
What about you, Ben?
Oh, well, it's been busy just trying to get things rolling for the lumber side of the construction for the addition to go up.
Mm-hmm.
Dan and I were working today, actually figuring out leveling and using a laser level and doing some country carpentry and compacting.
Really blinded in this process. No,
Yeah. Dan was down on his hands and knees and he just looked up and the red laser went right across his face. But we, I think we got it pretty well set to go as far as that is. Leveling and compaction. Let the rain over the next couple of days settle it a little bit more, and then aside from that, I was talking with actually the pastor at my church, and he was suggesting that for insulation, this aluminum foil bubble wrap essentially is what it is, but it looks like a large piece of cardboard. It's about an inch thick or so, or half an inch thick, and then it's aluminum foil on both sides. And apparently some people, that's all they're using in like between the subfloor and the joists. They just roll it out and layer it there and staple it to the joists, and then they do it around the skirting. And,
so it's not between the joists, it's just stapled to the bottom side?
No, the upper side of the joists.
The upper side?
Yeah, right in between the subfloor and the joists.
Yeah, that'll give you a little bit. Certainly the reflective side of it is not a bad idea, because you can reflect a lot of that heat up. And that's what I did on the second layer of my house, where I did in-floor heat on the upstairs.
Right.
And I laid that because I won't explain the whole process, but basically I have that sort of double bubble with reflective, but I didn't do like really thick stuff. Mine was only maybe like 1/4 inch or something like that.
Okay.
And I laid it out and then put my pipes on top, so that at least my heat off my pipes was reflecting upwards to the upstairs floor, not emanating 360 degrees into an empty joist space that wasn't going to benefit me at all. So definitely, but I would want more insulation than that in my floor for sure. If it was me.
Especially if you're compressing it between your subfloor and your joists, there can't be much insulative value at that point.
I mean, the insulative value of a double bubble is the air, right?
I'll send the YouTube video to the group chat, but it was the guy had I think he's in New York or New Hampshire. So in a minus 27 winter, he took a shovel and he was trying to dig out in front of the door, the opening to go underneath his the opening in the skirting. Anyway, so it's, obviously it's frozen, minus 27 Fahrenheit. That's kind of cold. He opened the door in the skirting and then reached his shovel in, and it was only like 2 feet away. And it was like the soil was as loose as the gravel that we were working with.
Yeah, but
here today,
I'm going to say I don't think that's because of the double bubble.
Well, he has it on the inside of his skirting as well.
Yeah, I know.
But that's all he has. He doesn't have any heat or pipes or anything running underneath.
Yep. Yeah, the mini homes that I've been under, like to have like a skirting around them in the wintertime, and they would just have, a vinyl siding type skirting, and they don't freeze underneath generally. I mean, they get cold, but there's not like frost in the ground kind of thing.
Right.
So I don't know. It's not hurting anything, because I've seen people put, 2 inches of like styrofoam on the inside of their skirtings and things like that as well. So you're not hurting anything by adding insulation, as long as it's not sealed.
Right.
But I would still want to insulate my floor. Because
I'm not saying I'm not going to. I'm just, it was an interesting thing that
I'm trying to think what you're going to get for R value out of that. I'd have to look it up, but I think you'd probably only get a couple R value out of that double bubble. Right. Where with 6-inch insulation, you're going to get, an R20 or an R24.
Yeah. But so aside from that, I continue to deal with the fact that it takes my brain a while to wrap itself around projects. And then just been prepping for World Championships. Team getting stuff set up. Actually purchased one of the homestead gadgets that we talked about last week, the battery pack that Dan suggested. So that and the preps, and that's pretty much it. Making sure all the handles and the axes are ready to roll. Waiting for uniforms to arrive. See how they look.
Cool. Yeah, when is that? Is that next month?
28th and 29th
of October.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Nerve-wracking.
I didn't do a lot this week. I've been working at such a busy time of year, but I did do some sort of advancements on my little addition, and I did some wiring, and I had found these really awesome LED. It's not strip lighting really, but they're 4 feet long LED lights. And they said 40 watt equivalent. So I'm thinking like a 40 watt bulb.
Mm-hmm.
They are so bright. Unbelievable. And I bought them on Amazon. There was like a package of, I think, 10 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, for like $150. And they came with three different types of like tail pieces. So you could plug them in. You could plug that plug into the end of this 4 foot long LED light. One just has like a cord that would plug into a regular receptacle with a switch on it, so you can switch it on and off. And then there was two other types, one for hardwiring in, and another one that you could actually string them together.
Mm-hmm.
So you could plug them in series.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I kind of jerry-rigged it a little bit, but I took those ones that you plug in between and cut them off and wired them, because I needed longer ones than what the direct wire attachments had. They were only like 5 or 6 inches long. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I wired those into my boxes on my ceilings, and I put some of them in my storage room or my back part of my house downstairs, and you can actually see in there now. Anyway, got that all wired up, and kind of the wiring's all running, so that's all quite nice now to have lights everywhere. And I would highly recommend it. I went and bought one for my shop, an LED light back last year, just to have over the bench. I think I paid $120, $30 for it. One light.
Wow.
And these I got like 10 of them for the same price. So sometimes that stuff is definitely worth getting in. I know some people don't like the Chinese made stuff, but probably where it comes from. But
okay. Give me the link. I want to look at these.
Yeah, they're just on Amazon. I could probably pull it up here shortly.
Full spectrum lights for.
They definitely would not be for growing. No, you would not be able to grow with them. They're not like you say, full. But they are the same. They're the same brand as some of the full spectrum lights I've bought. I've bought this same brand.
Yeah. Okay.
Of the growing lights. So, yeah, 160, I guess, is what they are. Free delivery. So, the other thing I did, I started cutting some firewood this week, since I'm putting in a actual wood boiler. So I was like, gee, I should actually have something to burn in it. So I had a pile of firewood. It's log length. It's been sitting outside for a while, so it's not really high quality. It's got some rot, and it's not great wood, but it's free. So free is good. There's lots of it, so I can cut it all up and throw it in there. And if I burn twice as much as I normally would to get the same BTUs, I don't really care, because I want to get rid of it so the next year I can actually put in some proper stuff. We should do a emergency heating show sometime. That would be a good topic for a show. Anyway, lost a cherry tree. This is kind of almost an end of an era
So
kind of thing.
unfortunate.
Yeah, we've got 3 cherry trees that were planted on the property. And can't remember exactly when this one was planted, but I'm pretty sure my wife planted it fairly shortly after we got married, I think. Anyway, it's been there quite a while. And we've had decent success with getting cherries, and she planted 2 more. Anyway, last couple of years has had some major rot issues or some sort of fungal issues, I'd say. And it's not black knot. I was concerned it was black knot, but it doesn't show any symptoms of black knot.
Nothing visible, no visible cankers.
No visible cankers, but there was a large split developed in the sort of the trunk, and eventually one section of the tree just died. And so I trimmed that out. And I would cut that piece out every year, like cut out any dead wood, and then we had a bit of a windstorm back a couple weeks ago, and it fell over. Basically, the largest chunk of the tree just broke off and fell over. So while I had the chainsaw running, I went in, cut that all up into pieces and to get rid of. And unfortunately, the next one to it also has a dead branch on it. So I'm concerned that we're probably going to lose them all here in the next little bit. Whatever disease is affected the first one is also infected one of the other ones. So anyway, that's kind of unfortunate, but that's how things go sometimes. All right. If people are interested in sending feedback to the show about anything we talk about, or to send topic suggestions on things you'd like to hear us talk about, you can send it to changingnormal@protonmail.com, or you can reply to any of our various social medias on Fountain or YouTube, etc., Twitter, and post the question there or the feedback there, and we'll get it and put it in the show. We're going to go straight to the main topic. Now we're not going to do a crypto corner this week because we're going to cover a bunch of crypto news.
A bunch of people are cheering in the background.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to do some crypto in the news, though, so we'll get some crypto in there for people.
Right on.
Yeah, so this is that's the tree cropping discussion. So Dan, you were kind of the driver behind this. So why don't you talk a little? Sorry, what's that?
It's definitely something I was interested in. I first read it after it was on the list of recommended reading for the PDC I took, the permaculture design course. Mm-hmm. So I read it since it was free. It wasn't like some of these other books that you have to pay $60 or $70 for to get hold of a copy. It was one of those. Like, well, it's out of copyright. There are free scans. Just jump online and find one. And so I read it then, and I found it super fascinating, especially considering when it was written. It was published in 1929. So that makes it, 93 years old? So maybe ahead of his time, perhaps. So I thought that makes it even more interesting to look at the things he said and maybe look and see if we've moved forward at all in the last few years since he hoped that his message would be heard and changes would be made. So he jumps right in with the problem he saw with agriculture. And he said, forest, field, plow, desert. That is the cycle of the hills under most plow agriculture. Indeed, we are destroying soil by field wash faster than any people that ever lived. Super interesting. He even walks through a scenario. He was standing on the Great Wall and looking at a desolate landscape that had been gullied and eroded away, a place where people used to live. And then he goes to places he saw in the United States as well. He even throws in a photo from Georgia, and I was actually shocked at the depth of this gully. A lot of the erosion we see, it's kind of like, well, look, we had a heavy rain and the river turned chocolate colored again. That's pretty common. I guess that's not even slow and steady. It's a little worse than that, but it's often you don't notice the most destructive forms unless you're actually out in the fields. Seeing some of those slopes where, you see the topsoil cut down and you've got those little 6-inch or 8-inch, 10-inch deep gashes across the field. Most people can kind of, I guess, ignore that it's happening. But it's definitely a huge problem. And he goes on to say, erosion is the greatest of all resource waste. It removes the basis of civilization and life itself. It is worse than burning a city. A burned city can be rebuilt. A field that is washed away is gone for ages. Again, something, people don't seem to think about the soil. Again, I think that so it's such a disconnect. How many people comment on erosion?
I think it's fascinating that you think about this comment as being made, and you said 29. That's when it was built or written.
Published in 29. Yeah. So he wrote this, in the mid.
This is pre-modern industrial agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was going to be my comment. This was before the massive farming boom, was it not?
Well, there was lots of farming, but at that time a lot of smaller farms, and you didn't have the mechanized agriculture that we, started to see after World War II. There certainly was mechanized, but you didn't have, the internal combustion engine was pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
People would have had some, tractors, but that, they weren't tractors that were pulling 10 or 20 or 30 furrow plows doing 400-acre fields in monoculture.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's an interesting point. But yet there is still so much damage done just by deforesting and plowing hillsides and slopes that should not have been deforested and found in that way. In some cases where someone might, grow crops for a decade or 2 decades, and then they would have lost the best of their topsoil, and they'd move on, move further west. And I don't know. I try not to be overly critical because realistically, these were people who are trying to survive.
Yeah.
So I try not to cast too much blame, for the logging and all that. But yet it is unfortunate that I guess a longer term perspective couldn't have taken hold.
Yeah, it's the idea of it being a basis of life, I think, is often missed. If you were to ask most people, what's the basis of life? They would say, oh, it's water or oxygen or, something like that. But really, it's plants, it's trees, or you could even argue it's the life in the soil. It's the bacteria in the soil that is the basis of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the medium in which life flourishes. You have the two main ones, really. You have the ocean, in which water is the medium in which life flourishes, or you have soil. Different types of soil, but nevertheless, that's absolutely essential. And it's really, I think it's a treasure, a natural resource that is undervalued, and people are careless with it, honestly.
Who was it? There was, I can't remember who it was quoted as saying something to the effect of, the only reason there is life on Earth is due to 6 inches of topsoil and the fact it rains. That's a famous quote, but I can't remember who that's by. But yeah, that kind of boils it down to this understanding that the whole reason for animals and people, and the fact that we can have any kind of civilization, as complicated as modern civilization is, all goes back to 6 inches of topsoil and the fact it rains.
Yeah, and it's very fragile. It's fragile if you don't have any protection. I mean, that's why we talk about things like mulch in the garden bed and so on. It's protecting the surface, and through protecting the surface, you're protecting the deeper structure as well, because it's through that surface layer that the soil allows water to flow through, and the oxygen gets down below the top 2 inches of soil. So you need that structure to remain, loose and full of life, and that organic structure. Whereas, here we have enough clay in the soil. You see it, if it gets pounded by rain, you get that skimming of clay on the top that then bakes in the sun. You have hard, cracked soil.
Right. It's funny that you say that it's fragile, and it is, but it's also very resilient, because nature seems to have these ways of rebuilding itself when it is damaged and healing itself. So at the same time as it being very fragile and easily destroyed, it's also able to, over time, naturally heal itself and rejuvenate that.
Yeah.
Which, of course, it can't do that when, people are tilling the soil every year and preventing that healing, ripping the scab off every spring, so to speak.
There is a tipping point, of course, where you turn into full desert. And I think what characterizes that type of land the most is how you see the water just run straight downhill. There's no structures to hold it. There's no organic matter soaking it up. There's no absorption. You see, deserts are often characterized by flash flooding, interestingly enough. An area that might get 2 or 3 inches of rain every other year can have flash flooding.
Yeah. Well, and the entire idea of deforestation is strongly or greatly contributes to the lack of water and desertification. Desertification?
Yes.
Desertification is my favorite. But after a Thanksgiving dinner, we have desertification of the table. Because those forests directly contribute to rainfall in the amount of rainfall.
That's correct. Not even just the woods that you think of, out in the boonies, but also even just trees within an urban setting. It's interesting that you brought up the deforestation because, obviously the path I've chosen in life as far as a career. You tree murderer. Oh, that's not my career. That's just my hobby.
You chop them for fun. That's even worse.
I make sure I hug them first. Like we did, we analyzed the amount of rainfall in a forested city versus a non-forested city, and the amount of runoff and what the drains in that city would have to handle. I've seen the direct effects on an endangered fish species population because of deforestation in the headwaters of the rivers, the headwaters of the streams that they inhabit, the rising temperatures of the streams because the headwaters aren't shaded, and the springs that once were cold enough to keep that entire river system cold it's now being warmed up too fast because of what was once deemed uncuttable, because it both handled rainfall and it also handled temperature, has been cut. So that it's not that we don't see it in a term of desert, like, you think of the Sahara Desert or the Gobi Desert or whatever, right? But desert in the fact that there's not going to be much life at all there. So that really stuck out to me. And when kind of perusing through the book and then in Dan's notes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The author also puts an interesting little jab in one of the captions of the photos there. He says, Major Andre, famous traitor in war, was not going to destroy any land. He would merely have changed the lawmakers from one group to another. And then nothing else, just that one sentence tagged on to that caption. Anyway, thought it was interesting. So he's definitely not a fan of people who destroyed land and left it in a condition where it couldn't flourish or would take decades to recover from the way it was treated.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes on to say, how does it happen that the hill lands have been so frightfully destroyed by agriculture? The answer is simple. Man is carried to the hills, the agriculture of the flat plain.
So basically the idea of misapplying techniques in areas where different techniques really should be utilized to make them productive for humans.
Yeah. No, I could add to that. I think it's better to avoid plowing even on flat ground.
Mm-hmm.
For many reasons, when you till ground, you're oxidizing the organic matter in the soil. So you're turning some of that valuable material into carbon dioxide, goes up in the atmosphere and is lost to your land. You're destroying fungal life. Definitely, we've seen there's been a lot more research now on how valuable that fungal web, that mycorrhizal fungi is to the plant life, how they can tap into those like mineral resources that a plant can't access, because most plants can only absorb water soluble nutrients. So there's different compounds, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are the big three we recognize in modern agriculture, but those don't exist in just pure nitrogen or pure phosphorus. They have to be in compounds that a plant can accept. And so these fungal webs can actually convert mineral-based substances into these water-soluble compounds. And actually, they can set up trade networks with plants where plants will exchange sugars in exchange for the minerals the plant needs. So there's so much cool stuff happening, beneath our feet that I don't know. It's just so fascinating how it all works together if you aren't disrupting it. And that's not to say that we have to leave land sitting untouched, because I think that can also be unproductive. It's just I guess the ways you intervene or interact should be ways that are beneficial, if possible.
So they should be ways that work with nature, not against nature. I mean, that's a pretty main permaculture concept, is this idea of working with the natural way nature wants to work and harnessing that to be productive for humans, versus seeing everything that that nature does as being needing fixed. And we can do it better. Not that I think there's anything wrong with necessarily doing something like hydroponics and stuff like that, where you try to mimic. You try to provide the plants with nutrient in a sort of unnatural environment in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's always better to try and work with nature and how nature wants to do things, because otherwise you're just fighting against it all the time.
Yeah. So swinging back to the idea of agriculture starting on the plain, that must have definitely been the case. That people would have started, more intensive growing of crops and inventing methods of tillage and so on. It was probably on like the river deltas and like probably the most rich soils on the flat grounds far before it moved to hilly grounds. You know, I can't see anybody up in the hills saying, you know what, we should like turn this dirt over.
Yeah, it would have been done on a very small scale if it was, you know.
The Egyptians were pretty good at it, creating irrigation trenches and ditches and utilizing the Nile River overflowing its banks to both create extremely fertile farmlands, but also create a store of irrigation for them. That was really neat to learn about in school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I always found it interesting. I mean, maybe this is a little bit off the topic, but I always found it interesting when reading about Western history, especially Western United States history. And of course, there's a lot of romanticization. Anyway, whatever. I'm into big words tonight, but I'm not doing great with them so far. About that whole time period, of course, but this idea of grazing ground versus crop agriculture ground, and how initially that was grazing ground that, you know, the plains and the sort of Midwestern United States was used for, and then eventually turned into, you know, massive agriculture growing ground. And some might think, oh, that is a good use for this flat ground. Let's till it up and, you know, you won't have as much erosion and all that. But it really is not. That ground is really not good for those sort of massive monocropping. It really was designed for massive herds of cattle, or at least large parts of it, which of course is completely flies in the face of modern environmentalism, and cow farts are bad and you shouldn't eat meat.
You stole my joke. Cow farts are so bad.
You know, so that's kind of, that's just popped into my head now, but it's kind of an interesting thought that ground supported for thousands of years massive herds of cattle with no intervention, you know, bison and buffalo and all that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as you till it, it requires massive inputs every single year to not have your topsoil just blow away in the wind. Well, just to all your nutrients that's in the topsoil, because erosion happens more than just with water.
Right.
Oh yeah. Yep. Water erosion, wind erosion. Yeah. When the buffalo were roaming the plains, that was, I don't know if it's what you would call a closed system. Definitely you can see that full ecosystem with, you know, the positive feedback loops where the action of the buffalo are benefiting the soil, and that's benefiting the grass that feeds the buffalo. It all working together. There was nobody had to figure out ways to manufacture nitrates and truck them in and spread them.
Mm-hmm. So this is more about trees, right? Like this book is primarily for tree cropping.
He kicks this off, you know, identifying a huge problem with erosion and saying, well, this is due to our agriculture practices. And so what can we do about it? And he says, it's time that we made a scientific survey of the plant kingdom to test it as carefully as industrial America has tested cement. Testing applied to the plant kingdom would show that the natural engines of food production for hill lands are not wheat and other grasses, but trees. We need to start in earnest to apply some of our science to producing genius trees that are to other trees as human geniuses are to other men. So he had an interesting example to contrast with the areas he looked at that were heavily eroded. and had that desertification. And that was Corsica and other areas around the Mediterranean where they had chestnut forests on all the slopes, and kind of walks through how those forests provided so much in the way of food for the people and fodder for the animals, wood for energy, just how that could flourish over centuries without soil degradation because it was forest based. Cool. And so he's really proposing here that our method of agriculture that's built around annual cropping is failing, and that we need to have the perennials, the trees. And for that to really work well, we can't just use the trees we have. We need to domesticate them. He doesn't use that word. He just says we need to basically acquire scientific methods and so on.
Are you saying we need to become ants?
Bee herders? Yeah.
Hopefully people will appreciate my Lord of the Rings reference.
I certainly do.
If you look at the things we enjoy now, say the cherries or the apples, those have undergone a fair bit of domestication.
Oh, it's contagious.
I
think it's domestication.
Yeah. Perfect. We'll test you out. So basically, human selection is like, oh, this one's bigger or sweeter. This one resists the disease that comes through a little better. And you get a very different plant from what was originally used when it was maybe just foraged. A tribe would just forage the wild plant, and then that moved into selection. So over centuries, that did produce changes in these plants, but we could certainly, I think, speed that process up if we had more actual scientific effort devoted to it. So that is his solution. And he goes on to list some difficulties with that. The biggest one being government is so short-sighted, they don't want to budget for anything as far as trees. So I found it interesting as he described this problem, how much this ties into the time preference that we've talked about. And again, time preference may not have been a phrase that was used, or if it was, he may not have been reading The Economists that were using it.
Yeah, definitely not.
Was
Keynesian economics was being born, so yeah, that definitely would have been something new. So maybe there would have been a natural understanding of time preference because this person probably would have grown up in the gold standard era. But
yeah,
so that
election cycles are short. There's no funding for it, or not very often that you can get much of anything, and it is a long-term project. And then he has a bullet point of what he thinks the work would need to encompass. He says finding parent trees. So that's the part where you basically scout the woods and so on for the plants that seem better than average, basically. You're going to take those as parents for your crossbreeding, And then secondly, you're going to hybridize the best parents you can find to try and create stronger lines and select a few good varieties and so on. And then maintaining testing grounds, basically you plant out seedlings over wider acreage. Genetic diversity requires that you plant a lot of individuals when you're planting from seed.
Right.
And he also hoped that there would be experimental farms where basically that would be built as models that could be copied. And publicity was his fifth point. And sixth, he wanted more studies in soil erosion prevention. And that one was interesting because I think the sixth point is the only one we can say has definitely happened at a wide scale. We definitely have in the departments of agriculture and at farmers conferences and so on, there's much more recognition of soil erosion and what we need to do to prevent it. McCain's, for example, is a pretty big corporation, but they've invested fairly heavily in looking at ways they can reduce erosion and start building soil again. They have their own experimental farms, and they're definitely taking a longer term approach than you expect from most corporations. I mean, we've seen that the quarterly approach is the one that is usually the one they go with, and they're definitely looking decades down the road. So it's interesting that there has been some progress made in that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I certainly would say that I'm kind of cool with government not having anything to do with it. I mean, I know that maybe was not the that's not the popular opinion anymore. When government has to fix everything. But I think this is best done by people who are passionate about it and are visionaries about it, and not having government involved. I think is probably better for many of the reasons that you pointed out.
Yeah. Well, here's how I see that. The thing is, it's often well-intentioned, but the system, the bureaucracy or whatever, will latch on to one form of a solution. And how that was selected is, that could have been done in a number of ways. But then they attempt to apply that solution to everywhere and incentivize that heavily.
Blanket solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it skews proper information flow. Basically, the feedback, which should be the people who are interested in preserving the value of their land, should be observing what is working and what is not, and applying that feedback loop. But you can skew that when you have a financial incentive coming in from government that can sometimes be very negative in some areas. Even if it was positive in others, it's very easy for that. We talk about that commonly as, if you're a hammer,
when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Looks like a nail. Yeah. And so they'll throw the same solution at every situation, regardless of whether or not it works in every situation.
I don't know if you can answer this question because it's kind of just off the cuff here, but what do you think is the solution to incentivize people to have a short time, long time preference? Individuals, not government, but individuals to take steps to using the land the way that nature intended it. I guess I can phrase it that way.
Well, I'm going to say I see two ways that this happens. One is through personal connection to the land. Those people get called out as hippies. They're pointed at as crazy. But there's a lot there. That was a movement that had some people anyway who were really wanted to work with nature simply because they cared about it. So that is one way. Personal connection to it. You start seeing more of the way nature works. You appreciate it. You have more respect for it. But that is not going to change our culture at large, I don't think. That's always going to be a minority of people. So I'm going to say the second way is prosperity helps to give people a long time preference.
Hmm.
And if you're not living, hand to mouth, you can afford to think about the future.
Yeah.
So what would tie into that, I guess, is anything that, I guess, helps encourage that long time preference.
So I think it's probably safe to say that a monetary system that was not based on having to make more money the next year to pay the bills of the previous year because of inflation and the subsidies and everything else that comes from government that makes farming quote unquote economical now would be a way of helping develop that time preference, correct time preference.
Using a cultural shift. Yes. Yep. We discussed
I guess what I'm
this.
saying, it kind of all comes back to the money.
In some ways.
Why do farmers farm the way they farm? I mean, a certain amount of it, of course, is, well, this is just how we do it because they don't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
But in some ways, people go, okay, I can do this other way, but the money doesn't work. But why doesn't the money work? Well, now we can go back to why money doesn't work in general in society. And so I don't know if I'm just spitballing here a little bit, but
yeah.
I feel like it kind of all comes back to the money.
I could see some parallels here with how people have treated and viewed money, or I guess allowed the evolution of money, with how people have, I guess, evolved agriculture. Yeah, where there are things that may produce some short-term gain. It's like having banknotes instead of commodity money. Physical gold. It was beneficial in the short term, and so the long-term ramifications were kind of swept under the rug or ignored. Yeah, I won't say that people adopting Bitcoin will automatically result in developing more domesticated tree types, but
I was just
more about the future for 2-3 generations down the road. That would be a huge difference.
Yeah, I was just kind of trying to think, well, what causes farmers to farm the way that they farm, right? And most often those things, it comes down to the money.
You have to cash flow the payments.
Exactly.
Because you owe millions of dollars to the credit institutions.
Exactly. Because we have a credit-based system and we have a inflationary system where saving that money does not benefit you. So there's no benefit for the farmer to say, well, I will save money for that tractor, because that tractor is getting more expensive and more expensive and more expensive than he can make the money to save in a lot of cases, depending on the year. So,
yeah, I know. Again, I'm not here to be critical of farmers, because they're trying to feed people and care for their families and so on. But it's easy to get stuck in a cycle where you have to, I guess, prioritize keeping the business afloat over adopting, I guess, practices that would be the most beneficial over a decades-long span of time. So
right.
It makes me think of the saying that a society flourishes when people plant trees in whose shade they know they will never sit in. And until really diving into the time preference and that whole philosophy kind of with Bitcoin, I never really understood that saying. And especially with, I mean, it's kind of funny that that's the saying that comes to mind when we're talking about crop trees. But it's just kind of came to mind, and I was like, oh, I probably should mention that, because it's so well. I mean, really, it's so true. It's what you guys have both been saying for the last little bit, right? Longer time preference. You're not as stressed about things in the near future. Like the immediate still needs to be taken care of, but it's taken care of in a way that it allows for the longer time preference frame of mind to flourish.
Yeah. If you feel more confident that you'll be existing in the future, you're more likely to care.
Yep, exactly.
So another thing I've noted, I guess, the publicity side, I feel like this is something that's moved a bit forward. And probably one of the biggest things was Mark Shepard's book called Restoration Agriculture. That one's been, I think, sold a fair number of copies and received a decent bit of recognition. I think that's recently helped popularize the idea of tree crops. And so that was definitely a book that inspired me to start looking into these things. And so I started looking, it's like, well, who's growing hybrid hazelnuts? It's like, where can I get some of these, and so on, and starting to look around at different tree nurseries where people who were really interested in, the hybridization of these tree crops, had been working on them for decades, and reading about what they'd accomplished so far. And then obviously I jumped right into, well, I got to put some of these in the dirt. I got to have some of these. I got to participate in that. And so it was 2015 when I planted my first hybrid hazelnuts, and went from there to it quickly turned into trying to have some of everything. This, some of that, and some of that. So it's a little bit like altcoins. It's hard to stop.
We told you we'd sneak some crypto in here somewhere.
And so what happened was most of those died.
Great analogy.
As it turns out, things like pawpaw and persimmon and apricot really do not want to grow here in Zone 4.
Yeah.
Even attempting to grow them from seed and not grafted nursery stock. It's like, well, there's a little chance. Well, if you planted enough of them and worked at it long enough, yes, you could probably produce some results there. And that actually is a big part of something you can do when you start breeding trees, is finding the ones that are more cold hardy. Definitely we're a more northern climate here. We're in Zone 4. And so when you start looking at tree nurseries, you find a lot of things that they don't recommend that you try to grow. Man, I wish we could push this a little further north and actually have access to this fruit or whatever it might be. Have you ever had that? You're like, oh man, I really want to grow this variety of apples. Zone 5, it's like, yeah, I bet I could make that work.
Yeah, it's so much of that stuff's a trade-off when you start looking at what you can grow and what zone. Because you think, oh, if I was in a zone 6 or 7, imagine the stuff I could grow. But you probably also couldn't grow other things that we can grow here. You're dealing with a whole different set of problems.
Yeah. So as far as crops which have a lot of potential, he goes through a lot of things. He was very interested in the trees that are legumes. different things: algaroba, carob, mesquite, honey locust. I think Bill Mollison was interested in honey locust as well, and I believe there are parts of Australia where he gained some degree of infamy from planting honey locusts. So I think there's some cautionary notes need to be taken from that. Some things that sound really good may have some negative side effects you need to watch, and definitely trees that have thorns on them are one of those.
Yep. We have black locust here in New Brunswick. It hurts a lot.
Oh, they're nothing compared to honey locusts.
Oh, lovely.
Honey locusts have spikes growing right out of the bark on the side of the trunk.
Oh, awesome. I love it. I love a tree that fights back. You bring your spike to a saw fight. We'll see who wins this one.
When you cut them down, it's like that story of what was it? I only remember like the Mickey Mouse version where he like chopped the bewitched broom into pieces, and each one turns into another broom. Or something like that. I'm pretty sure that was like an older Aesop's fable or something. The original, I can't recall. But honey locust is like that. You cut it down, and you get like 200 of them.
Yep. Yeah, they're very, very good for doing like coppiced.
I was just about to ask, is that
hedgerows.
Is that root suckering?
No, coppicing is suckering right off of like the branches and such. So when you coppice it, you basically lop off the top and the branches and whatever, and then it grows back off of those branches. Mm-hmm. So it's often used for like fodder trees for animals. So every year you can go in and you can cut those branches and such off, and it'll put suckers up and grow back even thicker on those branches and stuff.
Yep. Yeah, there's
you can coppice like elm, I think, and things like that.
Yeah, most hardwoods are to some degree able to take these practices. And I think coppicing specifically is cutting it lower, either at ground level or not very far above. There's another technique called pollarding, and that's usually got to do with training or taking sections of the plant much higher. I've actually seen like photos of trees where they had like, these huge, mostly horizontal limbs and, vertical trunks growing up from these, and these were just cut repetitively. So it's like when they grew to pole size or whatever for building a house or some some function, you would cut them off, and the base of the tree would remain there and would keep growing these. Anyway, I found it super fascinating. I don't know if you've seen any of that. I think part of this may have developed in Japan at a time where they registered every tree basically. You had to have permission to cut down a tree. And so rather than cut down a whole tree, pollarding was developed. So you could grow poles without cutting down the tree. Anyway, super cool. So I've jumped into the hybrid hazelnuts and tried to get other people growing them as well. Because I think this is one of the things, once you start, you're also trying to convert other people, which is part of doing this podcast topic. The hazelnuts have done fairly well and definitely have a lot of promise as a crop that's high in protein and high in oil. So, two very valuable food substances. And they're not, the ones I have aren't quite as good as European as far as flavor and size and all that. But they are decently hardy and a lot of potential for something close to European quality with a few more generations of breeding. So. But something we've seen a little bit of finally in New York. I think there is a little bit of state funding in Ontario. They've been kicking a little bit of money in, and that's primarily because of Ferrero Rocher, the Italian chocolatiers setting up shop in Ontario.
Oh, wow.
Setting up a North American facility. So, and they're like, hey, you guys need to like study hazelnuts and how we can grow them here so we don't have to import them from Italy and Spain and Turkey. So small shifts, maybe bigger changes in the future.
Yeah.
That hits on the main points of the book.
Yeah.
I don't know if you found any particular thing that interesting. I guess Ben in particular I'm interested in because you're further outside of the whole perennial agriculture thing, but you've had a lot of experience in forestry. So I was wondering if there's anything that really stood out to you.
Well, that concept of forest, field, plow, desert, and then the rainfall, that was the rainwater handling. That was the biggest one. Seeing firsthand, like I said earlier, just the way that the forests and the trees and the root systems and how it holds all the soils together and creates the like we talked about with the mycorrhizal fungi and everything in the soil and all of that ecosystem that it creates and how it handles rainwater and then just it filters it on through and the whole kit and caboodle behind how a tree benefits the entire system around it. That and the fact that I never really thought about how it progresses from field, plow, desert. So those are the two big things for me.
Yep.
Yeah, I think for me, there's a couple things here that maybe I don't know if we did a good job in tying them all together. The reason for cropping trees is because you could just go out and plant some spruce or maples or whatever.
Yeah.
But the idea is to create some sort of an agricultural bent to the trees that you're planting so that they're not just trees doing their thing, but they are also being productive and producing for human consumption as well. So marrying the agriculture and forest together, and in trying to, because many people would say, well, we can't eat spruce, we can't eat.
Technically, you can.
You can, but boy, you'd need a lot of salad dressing. I'm telling you.
Pickled spruce tips.
So that I think this is an attempt to try and marry those two sides together. Bring the let's produce something of value for human consumption side, which traditionally they would have said, well, we have to plow the ground to do that, but doing it in with a perennial tree based system, but also protecting the soil life, the environment, and erosion and rainfall and all of that sort of stuff. And this then ties directly to the first two ethics of permaculture, which is care of earth and care of people. Those two things, trying to marry those two things together. And then the other thing that I think also, we touched a little bit on how trees and forests affect rainfall and temperature in an area. They also are providing an incredible amount of biomass and organic material, which directly feeds fertility in the ground.
In the soil, yeah.
In the soil. And so was the other thing I was kind of thinking, I don't know if maybe we talked a lot about loss of fertility, but we didn't necessarily tie that to how the trees and forest benefit that and help repair that. So those are two things that popped into my head to kind of tie it up.
definitely I would recommend restoration agriculture for people who are like, what? Trees is agriculture?
That was me. I won't lie. That was me. I'm used to trees as just forest products, paper, toilet paper, lumber, things like that, chips, mulch, whatever. So this is, like those are the two things that stuck out to me, but it's a very eye-opening, like, oh, crop trees. That's even a term in silviculture, like the application of forest management techniques. It's a crop tree release. So it's like, so thinking about utilizing a forest land, and I've got friends who are starting a homestead, and they're talking about making a food forest and what the species they've got to bring in and what they've got to do. And so yeah, just being able to think about it and put on a different set of glasses and look at it through a different pair of lenses was really, really cool.
Cool. Well, let's move on to the news, because we were like, oh, this will be a short show this week. Yeah. Oh, well.
I should throw in here, if people want to read tree crops, we'll throw a link in the show notes.
Yeah, sure.
A PDF, and you guys can click on that and read through this if you want to be inspired to go crazy and grow some trees.
All right. So we got a bunch of news stories here. Which ones would you like to hit? Ben, I think you put...
I put a bunch in.
Most of these in, yeah.
I'm just making up for last week. Okay, so the first one was from decrypt.co, the EU lawmakers passing a crypto assets regulation bill. So basically, it's not so much that it's been passed, but just that the markets in crypto assets, so MiCA regulation bill, is one step closer to being put into law. So they're basically just, we kind of talked about it a little bit a while ago in regards to the possibility that they may require you to, regardless of whether you're sending to a custodial or non-custodial wallet, to provide the details, the information of who it's going to and who it's coming from. So basically, this is just another step in furthering that goal. So they talk about stable coins. They talk about how Bitcoin has a bigger mining. Bitcoin has is a energy intensive business and has a bigger carbon footprint than entire countries. We'll move on from that. They're going to...
Oh, that boiled my blood when I read that.
Like, anyway. Crypto is still apparently a Wild West world. And then they also passed anti-money laundering bill. So that is more or less what they're aiming for with the crypto transfers, to include the payers and the payees data. So there's a lot more legislation. This actually, the article didn't include a link to the legislation itself, so I couldn't read that. But I threw it in there because A, paints Bitcoin in a bad light because it's, burning up more energy than some countries, and B, because I figured we had talked about it a little bit in the past, so it's probably not a bad idea to just kind of touch on it when it comes back into the mainstream, using the air quotes, mainstream crypto news.
Yeah.
What else we got? Okay, so
jump to that middle one there. Jump to the.
So we've got which one?
Yeah, the middle, third one down.
Okay. There's commercial banks, or at least one is offering some form of crypto account. Is that what's happening here?
Yeah, so this one is from Delta News. It's basically America's oldest bank. So the Bank of New York Mellon Corporation. So basically, it's just saying that they're open for business with crypto. Synopsis of it is they basically won the approval of New York's financial regulator earlier in the fall. So it's Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it's only select customers. And they're also going to store the keys required to access those cryptocurrencies, which it's a custodial solution anyway. It's just basically performing traditional finance on the new financial system of Bitcoin. But
it shows that a major conventional legacy system is no longer just writing it off.
Right. I mean, it says in the article, basically Wall Street was kind of calling on the bank as an intermediary to step into that role and be an intermediary with cryptocurrencies. So it was it's called BNY Mellon, as founded by Alexander Hamilton more than 2 centuries ago. So it's over 200 years old. It's kind of a relatively big deal. Let's see the other high spots. It started back in February 2021 was when they started wanting, or at least announcing, that they were going to start dealing with cryptocurrencies and other digital currencies on behalf of investment firms. So
the other thing I take from that is banks don't do these sorts of things unless there's a demand by their customer base for it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like. So that should tell you there that the idea of owning, trading, purchasing, selling crypto in general is large enough now across the population,
right,
that large banks and institutions are pivoting to go, we need to capitalize on this, because obviously they want to make money. We need to capitalize this by providing these services to our customers.
Mm-hmm.
That should tell people who think that crypto is a scam, and which a lot of it is, but that it's just, a fad like the internet was. It's not. It's here to stay. It's part of life going forward. You can love it or hate it, but you better be prepared on how you're going to deal with it, because it's coming.
Light at the end of the tunnel is the train on the tracks. All right.
So this next one, maybe we'll wrap up with that, if that's okay.
Which one?
Yeah.
The Biden basically asking the Saudis not to cut oil production.
I think he was asking for additional 2 million barrels a day in production, and they're basically like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
100,000. That's what they increased it by.
But yeah, and the interesting thing is, like, they're not. This is such a supply and demand thing. If you look at it, the price of oil has started to drop, and so because the price of oil is dropping, the producers are saying it's not as profitable. We're not going to produce as much.
Mm-hmm.
We would rather produce less and keep the prices higher.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a natural effect of supply and demand that's being felt.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of always been the balance OPEC has played, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where if there are other sources, pushing oil onto the market, they can't afford to cut their supply back. They could lose market share.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not coming from anywhere else, they really have no incentive to not act like not a full monopoly, but close enough to it that
exactly
they're the big player, I guess you could say. as far as market pricing of oil.
Well, that's right. And now with Russia sort of being under sanctions and not having quite the open access for its oil to the world, now the Saudis even have more of a position to dictate that. Mm-hmm. And the worst part is there's absolutely no need of it. But like the United States has more energy production capabilities, well, the most of any country in the world. But they simply refuse to utilize it. I mean, there's oil wells drilled sitting there that simply aren't used because of the regulations and the prohibitions on permits and things like that. This problem could go away very quickly with if the United States wanted it to.
Yeah.
And Canada too, for that matter.
So much of this is just due to that top-down approach. Again, we're going to have a solution. Everything is a nail. And the solution is we got to get past using fossil fuels. Rather than figuring out, the next thing's what we're going to replace fossil fuels with, we're just going to make fossil fuels so expensive that we, slowly squeeze the economy. And and it's just a backward way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's too bad. I'm a big believer in a country being self-sufficient, just in the same way that individuals should be self-sufficient as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe this whole energy thing is something we could tackle. Because, I look at it and I'm like, 50 years, I hope we do all have electric cars, 50 years from now and whatever. But what I don't want is it forced in before it's suitable technology.
Yeah.
I hope we get there through advancing technology, but through fiat, no. Bad idea.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, it's been interesting to see over the years, and I, of course, not quite old enough to really to remember peak oil, but that argument was still around when I was growing up. This idea that we're going to run out of oil, by the year 2000, there's not going to be any oil left. We'll be living in some kind of, powerless, energy-less, post-apocalyptic Mad Max world,
That's why Y2K was such a big thing.
Yeah. There is no shortage of oil and natural gas at this point. Like, there is so much oil and natural gas, and I'm not even convinced that oil is not a renewable resource at this point. But it's the narrative. The narrative has shifted from we're going to run out, so therefore we need to find alternatives, to we're killing the planet by using this, so we need to find an alternative.
Yeah.
And the alternative needs to be this. So it's not even we need to find an alternative, let's find the best alternative. It's the alternative needs to be this. And like you say, Dan, it's very much this attitude of, well, they will adopt this when it becomes cheaper than what they had before. If we can make that so expensive that now electric, vehicles are cheap, but the problem is there's a period of incredible pain in there where you can't afford either. And the other problem is that just solar is just so, it's terrible for the environment, but it's not effective. It's not efficient. And it's heavily subsidized. All of those quote unquote green renewable energies are heavily subsidized. So it's a fake, even the price that they're at is not a real price. It's a artificial number that they're even dealing with.
Yeah. Solar has improved a lot From what I've read, return on investment is down to like 7-8 years now. So it's come a long ways. So and this is what I want to see, developing technology.
Yeah, but it's not. That's great for the personal use here and there, but it's not practical for the masses. When you have, I mean, Bitcoin fixes this to a certain extent, but you simply can't produce enough with solar and store it to be able to feed the massive populations that we have in the concentrated, cities. And that's just where solar just falls. It falls through. It just is not effective. Yeah. I mean, nuclear is the solution, in my opinion, especially the new nuclear reactors we have now using, what's it called?
Calling them small modular reactors. Is that what you mean, or something else?
No, it's a new element, and it's not it's much cleaner, much safer, and it doesn't have the waste that the old sort of plutonium or uranium, whatever they are, based reactors had, that were so dirty, and had the potential for, massive nuclear fallout. Like you see, everybody, when you say nuclear, they think of, Chernobyl and
the A-bomb.
Yeah, that these Fukushima, is that the name of the plant there in Japan? Fukushima.
And, tsunami damage.
Yeah. So yeah, the new ones. I'm trying to think I can't remember the new. It's a new like element. I don't know if it's officially an element, but it's a new thing that they use to basically create I think it's thorium.
Like thorium.
Thorium is the name of it. So, I mean, I'm not.
People would have believed you.
Kryptonite. Yeah. So I think that's the solution, but nuclear has such a terrible reputation because of the early days of nuclear that makes it hard to get past. So I mean, I'm not proposing solutions here. I'm just saying we can't displace oil immediately, and we shouldn't. And we should use the profit of oil. If people are truly believing green energy, quote unquote green energy, I always have to put that in quotes because what they call green energy is not green. It's not good for the environment. But those sorts of energy production methods, you should profit off the oil and work towards those things, not try to eliminate the oil and then hope that those other things are good enough to keep people going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to kind of tie that back to what we talked about there, kind of that imposing a top-down solution. Well, it would be like we discussed the problems with, plowing as an agriculture technique. We said, okay, we got this problem. Well, by 2027, all plowing will be banned. Yeah. It's going to have some serious negative ramifications. It's like you are going to directly harm people while attempting to solve a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think we can wrap things up there. No listener feedback this week, but hopefully everyone was somewhat entertained or learned something or had a really good nap, as the case may be.
It has been said you have a very good voice for radio. Not a face for radio. You have a good voice for radio.
Oh, well, okay. Thank you. That's So with that, thanks for listening. And remember, take small steps, be courageous, and change your normal every day.